and it's like the center of our universe. And we're like, why? And then we get to a certain age, we're like, oh my God, bug! Like, we reach this point where we stomp on reverence and awe and wonder and magic and mystery. And for me, like, whatever religious tradition you might believe in or not believe in, for me, what has me come alive is this sense of, like, something sacred, something bigger than I could possibly know or understand, something that opens me up instead of closes me down. So when I entered the Redwoods, that was my experience. I was like, oh, this is what church is supposed to feel like. So when I found out that 97% of these forests have already been cut down, and that we are still logging them, even though 97% of them are gone. That most of the logging we've done has been in the last 100 years, 150 years, but the jumping up in the capacity to cut them at the rate we're cutting them has happened in the last 100 years. So trees that are 2,000 to 3,000 years old, 97% of them gone in 100 years. The fact that we cut them on very steep hillsides, causing mudslides that destroy habitat for species, including threatened and endangered species, as well as destroying people's homes and lives. The fact that I found out and then witnessed where after they clear cut the forest, they mow everything down, and then they're mandated by law to mitigate fire hazard. And if you think about when you're starting a fire in your fireplace or in a campground, you start with kindling, and then you put bigger pieces, and then you finally get to the logs. Well, when they're logging, they take all the logs away, and they leave all the kindling. So it's like a fire hazard waiting to happen. So they're mandated by law to clean it up, and the way they clean it up is they come in and they light the clear cut on fire with diesel fuel or with napalm. So not only are all the trees gone, they've killed off everything in the soil as well. So when I had my first experience of walking into what literally felt and looked like a bomb had been dropped in the middle of the forest, I was as deeply hurt as I had been deeply moved by my experience at the Redwoods. And it was that made me feel like I had to do something. I didn't know what I was going to do, I just knew that I had to do something. I went back to Arkansas where I'd been living, sold everything that I owned. My friends were like, what are you doing? I don't know. Why are you selling everything? I don't know, I just know I'm supposed to. What exactly? I said, well, I'm going to California to help the Redwoods, and then I'm going to Jamaica. It took me 10 years to make it to Jamaica. I just knew I wanted to help. I got out to California, was trying to help, was not getting anywhere because I didn't have any activist experience. Also, the direct action normally ended in the wintertime because previously there was a law that said they couldn't log in the winter because redwoods are a part of the temperate rainforest, and in the wintertime is when it rains a lot, and if you cut everything down and then it rains a lot, hillsides slide away. So there had been rules around when they could log and couldn't log, but those rules had been changed, and so now logging could happen in the wintertime. But when I got there, I had no activist experience, I had no job, I had no car. I was like, they were just kind of like, oh God, here comes another well-meaning, young, wide-eyed young person who thinks they want to help. And then they show up and they get involved, and it's so intense that after a few days they give up and go home. So I was kind of receiving that kind of resistance. But I ended up at this place called Base Camp. This young guy from Detroit, Michigan, named Shakespeare. He literally talks like this, man, and I love it because like anytime I think about him, I'm just like, yeah, man. So we were at base camp one day, and he said, Julia, you see that tree up there on the hillside? There's two ridges of this tree that looks kind of like the top has been cut off, and has like almost like what looks like a little flag. I said, yeah. I said, what's that? He said, that's Luna, man. And I was like, cool, what's Luna? He said, that's a tree sit, man. And I said, cool, what's a tree sit? He said, that's where people sit in trees in order to protect them, man. And I was like, yes! I finally figured out what I could do. Because although I'm not an activist and had no activist experience, I grew up extremely poor with 2 brothers and no sisters. My home for many years was a 31-foot camping trailer with 5 people. Not much space. Being very poor, you have to make a little bit go a long way. Played outside because we didn't have computer games and cell phones and all the things kids have now. And growing up with 2 brothers and no sisters, played a lot in trees. So I was like, wow, I can go sit in a tree and play by myself and help make a difference. I don't have to interact with anybody because I am shy, even though I'm people blah, 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 like my nature is shy. So when I heard about trees, I was like, I know how to do that. That's something I can do. And then this guy, Almond, was walking around trying to get people involved and getting people to volunteer. I was like, I'll do it. And then he asked me, do you have any experience? And I gave him the riff I kind of just gave you. Not exact experience, but kind of. And he literally had a clipboard in his hand, and I kid you not, that clipboard went right up in front of my face. He was like, anybody else want to sit in there? Anybody? And nobody else would volunteer, and so he had to pick me. And that's how I ended up in Luna. Because people oftentimes ask, well, how'd you end up in that tree? That's how it happened. Climbed up into the tree, thinking I was going to be there 3 weeks to a month, and it turned into 2 years and 8 days. And it was a long process. Most people want to know what it was like up there, so I'll tell you that part really fast, and then I'm going to move it into opening it up for conversation. I lived on a 4x6. It was a 4x8 piece of plywood that had been put in a dumpster, so it had been cut to fit some room somewhere, and after it was no longer wanted, it was thrown in the dumpster. Earth First activists took that out of the dumpster, brought it up to Luna. They used the light of the full moon, which is why the tree's named Luna. If you were bringing up platform and ropes and supplies to a tree and you're trespassing, you get arrested before you make it there. So they used the light of the full moon to be able to see, to bring all that stuff up in the middle of the night, and that's why the tree is named Luna, Spanish for moon. My roof and walls were made from plastic tarps. I redesigned them because no trees had gone through the winter time before. A lot of my time was, in the beginning, was just spent turning my home into something that could last through the winter. My roof and walls, I turned into a water collection system. On a foggy day, I could gather 2 to 3 liters of water. On a heavy raining day, I could gather 6 to 10 gallons of water from my system. I used that to drink, to cook, to bathe, clean, brush my teeth, all that stuff with. Had a single burner camping stove, used that to cook, warm my water, tea, cleaning myself, etc. Had a sleeping bag, roll it out at night, sleep in it, roll it up for the day, sit on it, my only piece of furniture. I could free climb in the top 10 stories of the tree. The tree is 20 stories tall, 200 feet tall. I could free climb in the top 10 stories. That's what I did for exercise when the weather was bad. I huddled on the platform with every layer of clothes and prayed to get warm. I had a phenomenal ground support team who risked arrest every time they hiked up that mountain to bring me food and supplies. I tell people one of the great lessons for me about the tree sit was recognizing how important every person on the team is. I tell them, like, I might be more famous for that action, but all it means is there's more people up in my business. The reality is, if it weren't for my ground support team, I couldn't have done that. If it weren't for the folks on the ground in the office doing the boring stuff of answering emails and phone calls, the action would not have had as much impact. So it was team that made the success of the tree sit. Yes, it was also my sitting there and refusing to come down, but that wouldn't have made a difference without team. So my team would hike up food and supplies, put it in a bag, I'd haul it to the top, and lower down things to be taken away. The company did many things to try and get me down. That's the other thing people want to know. Well, didn't they try and get you down? They cut trees directly at the tree I was in, hitting the tree I was in with other trees, trying to knock me out. They surrounded me with ropes and security guards and floodlights for 10 days to cut off my supplies and try and starve me down. When they realized that wasn't working, they got air horns that were very, very, very loud, and they blew them about every 15 to 20 minutes all day and night so that I couldn't sleep for 8 days, so I did not sleep for 8 days. When that didn't work, they hovered a twin-propeller Chinook helicopter that has 300 miles an hour winds underneath it, 70, 75 feet above my head, trying to rip me out. I had people shoot guns at me, the whole thing. And when that didn't work, eventually they thought, well, we'll just ignore her and she'll eventually come down. When that didn't work, they finally agreed to negotiate with me. And after 738 days, I was able to come back down on the ground because I had successfully negotiated an agreement with the corporation that protected the tree I was in and the grove around it, and that's why I was able to come down. Okay. A couple of brief points, and then it's your turn.